Depp, how was your mother's health during this time?
Not good, not good at all. My mom was in Cedars-Sinai Hospital, and she was on her way out. She was dying.
How often were you going to see her during this time?
Excuse me?
How often were you going to see her during this time?
As much as I could under the circumstances. When I did go and get to see my mom, she was pretty much incapable of speech. Her speech had left her. At that time, she seemed to. Her eyes were still open, and she could kind of react with her eyes, but she couldn't speak. And then, not long after that, once her eyes closed, she lay there for the duration of her life, which ended on the 20th of May, the night before I saw Miss Heard for the last time. Well, essentially.
I'm so sorry, Mr. Depp, but how did your mother's death affect you?
As it would anyone, I suppose. There was one thing that I couldn't fathom was, I brought my kids to see Betty Sue in the hospital, and at that time she was not functioning. She was not responsive. She was alive still. She was fighting still inside, but she was lying in the bed, and excuse this analogy, but all I could think of was how if she's conscious if she's conscious of everything that's going on around her, but has no ability to speak, has no ability to move. I knew that the one thing, as far as Betty Sue was concerned, the last thing that she would have wanted was to have ended up lying there on it was like, there's my mom lying there on a deli platter, and it was a horrible image. But I brought my kids in to say goodbye, and we all spoke into her ear, and then she passed away later. So it was painful, but there was some side of it too, at least to me, that in a way it was, I was happy for her.
Why was that?
Because I can't imagine Betty Sue or my mom, I can't imagine anyone lying there in quite possibly was a kind of a locked-in syndrome. And if she's surrounded by 10 people looking at her lying there in that on that deli platter, if you will. I was happy for her that she was out of pain, out of frustration, out of... I was happy that she'd moved. Not happy, I was relieved that she was no longer in that situation. Though, when those you love leave, we're the ones stuck with the pain, with the grieving. But I was glad that my kids got to see her and give her send-off, I suppose. And but it was it opened my eyes quite a lot to a number of things.
And what were some of those things that your mother's death opened your eyes to?
That life is a bird song. That what feels like 100 years is in fact a second, millisecond. Nobody can count those things, you know. So I had made peace with Betty Sue because I understood where she came from, and I understood how difficult her childhood was, and I understood that she had not had the proper training or proper teaching or the proper background to be anything other than what she had been when we were younger. I forgave her for all that, as one would, should. So I was, it opened my eyes to the fact that yes, if you try in relationships, whether friendships, whether courtships, whether marriage, whether this, whether that, try your best, try. If it's not going to work, it's not going to work. And more importantly, if you're going to get out of it, if you're going to make an end, which I had decided that it was, somebody had to call it, and I decided that I would call Amber and tell her that my mom had died that day. And then I very calmly said, look, I've made a decision and I think it's the best thing. I'm going to file for divorce.